you have a favorite fighting game that very specifically has an unbalanced cast? I mean, I guess by default that would have to be just like the Smash series in general, because for the most part those games are balanced really horribly. But usually their balance isn't horrible in a fun way, it's usually just horrible in a sad way. Where the bad characters don't have anything that's super fun about them normally, they're just kind of lame. Like Ganondorf being extremely slow, or Dr. Mario being Mario but worse. I feel like Smash's attempted balance but just falls short. Smash is a weird case where, like, they attempt balance sometimes, but as a series, it is not balanced with, like, fighting game community first. It's still very much, at least somewhat balanced around being, you know, the party game. So even though it's a game that's gone as far as to have balance patches in recent years, it's usually just to get rid of egregious stuff. But even then, they usually only do that to, like, the better characters. Honestly, Smash patch notes are, like, weird. Half the time they'll just be something like, this character has a few more frames here, and it's like, okay. That doesn't fundamentally change a single thing about the character, but I guess you felt like you needed to change it. So, like, those kind of changes, I don't know who they're for, because they're not for the competitive scene. And they tend to be so small and weird that I don't know even how they would affect the casual experience. Noelle's kind of a funny character, because she was, like, back when I played, like, not in the competitive scene, but just with, like, a bunch of my friends growing up, she seemed like a default character that a lot of people leaned into, and I think it's mostly because her like, special character thing, the drive, as they call it for each character, where, like, their A, B, and C buttons tend to be pretty basic moves. Their D button, or drive button, tends to be, like, a more gimmicky type of attack. Hers is literally just you mash it a whole bunch, and then you do crazy things. And half the time while you're in that mode, you have invincibility frames. So I think people who are just, like, not super fighting game savvy, messing around with the game for the first time, were just kind of like, oh, this is overwhelming, and I keep not getting hit by things, so this is actually pretty fun. And for the record, that definitely isn't something that even makes her, like, a super good character or anything. It's just the kind of thing that, like, it's like a game design term where, like, you know, people are just trying to find, like, the most optimal way to do something, even if it's, like, really lame and simple. Where they're like, oh, this is the easiest way for me to get away with stuff, so I'm gonna do it. I just noticed that a lot of people would gravitate towards her for those reasons. And that's not, like, a super uncommon phenomenon with games in general. Like, in Smash, I'm pretty sure the two characters I saw that the most with were Little Mac and King K. Rool. I honestly don't specifically know what it was about King K. Rool that a lot of people gravitated to. Little Mac's a little bit more obvious, though, where kind of like the thing that Noelle does, where she hits buttons and she moves around a ton and throws out of a ton of attacks and is super invincible. With Little Mac, it's like, is he a good character? No. But is he a character that, like, is extremely fast and hurts a lot and has a lot of invincibility frames? Yes, he is. So when people are just playing against their friends at, like, you know, just kind of like a casual level of play, that character is just so effective because people don't have, like, the competitive knowledge to deal with it. And I remember seeing a lot of that, like, when the game came out. It was, like, there was, like, articles and everything of people being like, Little Mac is, like, a problem and makes playing this game online not fun. And you know what? It probably wasn't, because it was probably super annoying to deal with if you didn't know the competitive way around dealing with it. Honestly, even as a competitive player, like, a competitive player who doesn't know the matchup, like, at all, because I almost never see the character, it actually does still end up being something scary, where I'm like, I know you're easy to deal with, but I've never dealt with you before, so I don't know how to do it. Because your gimmick is overwhelming if you don't know how to work around it. That is kind of a thing with fighting games in general, though. Like, just on the topic of balance, is that even if the raw character balance technically leans in a direction where you know, the bad characters are, like, to some extent, objectively bad, as far as, like, maybe their damage isn't great, or their combos aren't great, or they just don't serve the game too well. There's kind of, like, a little bit of, like, human balance in there of exposure, where character is considered bad, so competitive players don't play the character. So then when competitive players do play the character, they don't have the matchup knowledge to know what to do against the character. So sometimes worse characters can kind of get away with some murder just on people not really knowing how to deal with them. But yeah, it's just kind of funny how that kind of stuff works out. And then also, a funny thing about the lower tier characters that you sometimes see with games, especially with time, is that because not many people play the character, there's a lot of exploration that needs to be done with the character. So a lot of people kind of hope to be that, like, breakthrough person that figures out something so fancy and interesting with the character because they're, you know, somebody that actually ended up spending time with them. The hope is to, like, make some kind of difference in how the character is seen. And, like, sometimes that actually matters. Honestly, just losing a ton. I feel like I lose more than I win on stream in general, but I don't feel weird about it. I feel like I'm learning always when I'm playing, so I don't usually feel like I'm having awful matches or anything. What's been the win-loss ratio for the stream? Honestly, not great. I was actually literally just saying that a second ago. I was like, honestly, I'm pretty sure my win-loss ratios are never amazing on stream. Which, you know, I could blame on things like the fact that I'm streaming in and of itself, where I'm kind of like going, you know, between the chat and the game and thinking about talking, so I'm not just quiet in hyper-focus mode or whatever. But I don't love leaning on that as the excuse, because I feel like I do a half-decent job at managing both mentally, if that makes sense. And I don't want to say it, I don't want to make it sound like I'm making that as an excuse, like suddenly I would be doing a million times better if I was off stream. Because I know that's not the case. But at the end of the day, I care about the matches being good and fun, and hopefully interesting to watch, because I don't think there's too much like that goes on in stream where I'm just like totally getting wiped and there's nothing interesting going on at all. Even if I'm not always winning. Also, this single person is who I've been facing for a lot of the stream, and they're just really good, which I am okay with facing. If they want to face me and they're that one step above me, and they don't mind the fact that I'm losing most of the matches, I honestly almost prefer that, at least from like a personal growth perspective, where I'm like, no, don't go. I want to learn what I'm doing wrong against this character. Hey, actual BlazBlue song. I love the soundtrack enough that I still want to have it on a playlist while I'm playing the game. I mostly just like having enough variety that it's like not all of that. Especially because when you're playing online, you don't always have control of the song that's being played, and sometimes, you know, whoever you're playing against just won't care, and they'll just be playing the same song over and over again. I assume most people turn off the in-game OST to do grinding. Yeah, it's like unfortunate too, because it's like a lot of... I assume most people like this with most fighting games, myself included, where like they put so much effort into the soundtracks, and they're always amazing soundtracks. But like at the end of the day, it's like a, you know, depending on the game, like maybe 10 to 30 songs that you can only listen to so much. And then in like the grand scheme of things, on top of that, what's it called? If you're actually going to like in-person tournaments and stuff like that, it's so loud that you can barely even hear the game anyway. So you might as well just bring your own music to listen to. There was actually a period of time where I was running Smash tournaments with like friends of mine and stuff, and I would basically do the same thing there that I do on stream, where like I went through the trouble to build a very different playlist because I tried to make it more like Nintendo focused and stuff like that. But I tried to make like a fighting game playlist to play at the tournaments. And it seemed like a lot of people liked it, probably for that exact reason. Especially in Smash, where, like, they tend to be, like, because there's only so many stages that are being played, and 2 of the stages are always Animal Crossing stages with the newer games, you tend to hear the same songs even more than you probably do in most fighting games. So, a lot of people seem to appreciate the fact that there was literally anything else playing in the room. Yeah, I guess I also like doing it on stream for the same kind of reason. On top of just giving people not the same, like, 30 songs to listen to. You know, I don't always do fighting games on stream. I play a lot of other stuff on stream. So for the people that maybe don't like they like watching me, but maybe they're not, like, super invested in the fighting game side of things, at least, I don't know, get some Derek radio. Even if it's full of anime characters screaming in the background. Yeah, this song does something really cool that I really like when boss song, like, yeah, I guess boss songs in most games, but you know, in this case, boss song in a fighting game. I don't know if there's like a proper, like, musical term for it, But I just like that it does this thing where it like it sounds like a really intense boss song, like it's like the villain's theme, so it's like this big, scary, aggressive song. And then it like winds down a little bit, and then it gets like really heroic for a little while. Which is this part right now. And then it just goes back to being like boss song. My go-to example is usually like the Secret of Mana boss battle song, where it's like absolutely insane for most of it, and then it has like a moment where it like chills out, and then just gets like really cool and like, again, heroic's the best word I can think of for it. I'll put that song on next so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. Or at least I got the remake version of it, it'll do. Super crazy. Starts to wind down. Heroic. Oh, what was I gonna say? Oh, just on the note that you made earlier about the whole like playing against people who have thousands of matches under their belt and whatnot. One thing that definitely plays into that at least a little bit as well is even if a lot of my time with the game wasn't spent competitively, I still have a decent amount of knowledge of like what the characters do and stuff just from playing the game for like, or playing the series for like upwards of 15 years. Where even if I'm not 100% familiar with a matchup going into it, at least knowing the general game plan from like just having all the background knowledge of the game can go a long way. And I think that's a lot of the reason that Smash as a game ends up appealing to a lot of people as their first fighting game. Because a lot of people have played Smash like their entire lives, even just like over friends' houses or whatever for parties. And most people know what most of, at least the, you know, maybe not everybody knows what everybody in Ultimate does, considering there's a lot of new craziness in that game, but like, most people probably know what like all of the characters do up to Brawl if they have like an okay amount of history with the series. I always forget how close this game's release was to like all of the original Sonic games and how much like DNA it kind of shares. It's just cool how this game, like, I don't know, I guess just doesn't have the future of Sonic yet. Like it didn't even reach the 2000s like DNA like Sonic X. Not even Sonic Adventure 2, where like a lot of like the future influence for the series came from. Kind of like Mario 64. I was thinking about that the other day actually, because for shits, like I'm not usually one to get too inspired to play a Mario game. But I was trying to think of like a random like game to play on my Switch before bed. And I started playing Super Mario World, because I did actually grow up with that game, so I was like, oh, this could be fun to play again. And I completely forgot about like the giant switches, like the big color switches that are in the game. Because those are just something that I don't think they've really touched on much since. But they did, I believe, in Super Mario. Yeah, they did in Super Mario 64. That's how you unlocked like the power-up boxes. And that just feels like such a weird thing where I wonder if they would have thought to do that if like Super Mario World wasn't the game that came before it. How's the squirrel been doing? I've been doing pretty good. Been a very exercise-heavy week, which has been good and also exhausting. Mostly just because it's nice out again, which has me very excited. But Whimsy bought an e-bike, and I just kind of busted my bike back out again. I actually just dropped my bike off today at the shop, because the left pedal, no matter how much I tightened it, would be really loose. Which is a safety issue in and of itself. But then it was like extra a safety issue because my right foot is the foot that has issues, which means that's the one that has to compensate for the fact that my left pedal was loose and I shouldn't put too much pressure on it. So biking kind of sucked more than it needed to. I used to do a lot more biking just for fun before my foot started having issues. Like, it was just kind of like a hobby. Like it wasn't like a hobby in the sense that like I really like dove deep into any kind of like biking culture or anything like that, or tried to do any like biking events or anything, but just in the sense that like live in a nice area, the summers around here are nice, and I just kind of like biking around. So a lot of the times in the summer, especially when I was growing up, I would just kind of like bike all over the place, whether or not it was for like a good reason. usually my goal too would be that like I would try and kind of like build myself up over the course of the summer. So then by the end of the summer, I could basically just like essentially bike for an entire day, like get lost a little, like go like several towns over and come back, just because it was fun to do that kind of thing. But ever since my foot started to hurt a lot more, the idea of doing something like that just sounds awful, which is why I'm hoping it gets better. I'm trying to take a lot more care of it.
Something good may happen at the casino area.
You might win money if you try gambling, Amy. You should try gambling. Something good might happen. It's not statistically likely, but it might happen. The house doesn't always win. Took a programming course for like 2 years. I've forgotten most of it now, though. Yeah. Outside of like some baseline fundamentals, it can be hard to hold on to. I never... Well, okay, technically I went to a programming class, but it was after I had already messed around with a decent amount of programming stuff, where I just have a history of messing around with the program Game Maker, which has gotten a lot more traction in recent years, which is cool. I'm glad to see that they're like still around. Mostly because that means I could technically still use it if I wanted to. I've been using it since like, or you know, my prime of using it, so to speak, was like I think version 5 and 6 up to like version 8 or so, which I think was basically from like 2005 to 2013, 14-ish. Never finished a single project, and unfortunately lost most of like the small projects that I messed with like way early back in the day, like closer to like the 2005 time. Because I would fucking kill to still have some of my old Game Maker projects. That sounds like the coolest thing to still have. But I learned a lot of it on my own, or like bouncing off a friend of mine who I've worked on projects with, or like, you know, looking up random little tips and stuff online. And I was able to learn enough that I could probably throw together a small semi-functional project if I really wanted to. But making games is hard. I guess it's really the short version. Which means I should have at least tried to do like something smaller in scale, like just for the sake of like getting a little something done. But I just kind of never got that far with it. In somewhat recent years, I went back to like a platformer engine that I was working on at one point. Functioned well enough that like I could probably, even if it was just like slapping together some like tile sets, I could probably make a half decent project out of. But also I have no ideas for it, so I can't really do anything with that. But yeah, I've had enough random times in my life where even just that super duper basic level of programming knowledge I got from messing around with Game Maker has came up in a way that like felt valuable to me. Like it makes it so like basically any code, even if I have no idea how it like actually gets put together at the end of the day, I could like look at a bit of code and be like, oh, I can at least read this enough to know what it's trying to do, even if I couldn't have built it myself. And I'm glad that I at least have the kind of that base level knowledge. And it, just to go back to something I kind of hinted at earlier, it like kind of carried me through a class in college where I took like a basic Java. Oh no, Java? I don't even remember. Some kind of basic programming course where I took like the first class for it, and I blitzed through it enough that my teacher wanted me to like tutor people, but I'm like, I promise you I know nothing about this language actually. I just used Game Maker when I was in like middle school and kind of sort of know how code works. I don't think I could actually tutor somebody on this. I feel like I was thinking about something when it came to like Sonic's like music identity over the years, where like my brain wants to consider this like kind of like the very canon to like Sonic's music identity, and obviously in like the grand scheme of his games they are. Outside of like appealing to old-time fans, they don't really do the music like this too much. And I remember thinking about it when Sonic Forces came out, because that soundtrack is like super like modern electronic music in a way that I'm like, okay. I mean, it's like works pretty well for the character, but it feels very like out of left field and like hasn't really been a part of his identity like this before. But then when I thought about it for like 2 seconds, like basically, unless it's like pretty strictly like very video gamey music. Sonic soundtracks are always kind of just whatever popular cool music is. Like even in like his roots in the 90s, it was all very like it had a Michael Jackson phase because Michael Jackson was popular in the 90s. And then, you know, what was popular around when Adventure 1 and 2 came out? Rock music, punk music, rap music. And then what was popular when Sonic Forces came out? Electronic music. Not to say that they're like literally doing it for the sake of like trend chasing, but I think it is at least in some part like to make sure that Sonic feels cool to the kids in a way that they're familiar with. Sonic chased a trend, he would catch up in no time. He is pretty good at chasing. It's not cross-tag. I bought around when all the arcs. Oh, nice. I actually, of all systems, for some reason, I decided to buy cross-tag battle on the Switch. Yeah. I will say though, if there was anything that getting that game on Switch convinced me of, it's that I unironically wish, not specifically a Joy-Con, but I wish that I could get a fighting game controller that has buttons for directional inputs. Which is obviously effectively what like the what the hitbox is, but the fact that the Joy-Con has like the 4 individual buttons for the D-pad, I thought was like the coolest thing ever for fighting games. Not that I would attempt to try to use Joy-Cons while playing fighting games on PC or anything. They're not exactly the most ergonomic thing in the world, but yeah, it makes me wish that that controller existed, but it probably never will. Especially because it literally everybody hates that, but apparently me. So I honestly kind of always liked that, at least to some extent. It was just doing that convinced me that it would actually be really cool for fighting games. I feel like the reason that gacha stuff drives me the most nuts, outside of like the obvious like business practice side of things, especially in games that have like a pre-established, you know, franchise behind them, they put so much work into making a bunch of insanely cool designs that I'm like, I wish these were in literally any other game. Because the gacha aspect is not convincing me to try and get them to use them in whatever probably pretty uninteresting game they're in. But like, wowee. The game that drives me the most nuts with it is the Mega Man mobile game. Because the idea of like an open-ended Mega Man game with like 1 trillion levels that you can play as any character you want in sounds like the coolest product in the entire world that I could play for ages. But it's a mobile game that controls awful and has a bunch of like awful stat-based elements to it, which is like the opposite of what Mega Man is about. So I don't know. I mean, I know why they added them to the game, but it was just like 2 genres that were not meant to, like, or you know, a game that was never meant to have those kind of elements to it. And it is just, it plays like a Mega Man game, but worse, and with like all of the gacha game things that are terrible about gacha games. And I'm like, God damn it. Why couldn't this have just been a cool-ass Mega Man game? This song keeps coming on shuffle. Because like, when I built this playlist again, I like listened through a bunch of stuff, even stuff I maybe didn't listen to in a while. I added this song to the playlist because I thought it sounded cool. And I was like, damn, where the hell did this song come from? And I was like, oh yeah, the Pokemon mobile game. Because for some reason, mobile games get insanely good music. I guess because they have the budget. Yeah, that's a funny thing that I like. Forget if I've talked about before, where like, I think it's really funny that like, if a franchise has a mobile game, I'll obviously never care to play it because I just do not like mobile games. But every time I find out that one exists, I'm like, well, time to see what that soundtrack looks like. It's probably has a bunch of out-of-this-world remixes. Or original songs. Bayonetta in particular has basically like a hidden battle song. I think it's on this playlist, but I can like find it afterwards. Or I guess this isn't a mobile game, but a pachinko machine, which is another kind of similar same boat situation. Situation where, you know, it's a ridiculous, silly moneymaker for them. So they're like, fuck it, let's make it like a real-ass game. At least budget-wise, even if it's not an actual game.